But is it fair to think that it was Uniswap which actually brought DeFi and DEX into that one event, if you, as you said, right? And by the time I started understanding the game, Sushi had
Yeah, I came.
already come in.
And essentially back then, Binance was absolutely crushing Coinbase. And you can see on the previews that Uniswap was struggling to essentially reach parity with Coinbase and eventually reached it around Q2 2023.
Licensing with Uniswap v3 is in a way form of property right for me, the way I see it. Welcome to Digital Dunya podcast. Today, Bryce and I are back together again. This time, we decided we are doing a short series on DEX, the birth of decentralized finance, and how it all started. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me again. And especially on this is like my pet peeve topic, you know. You launch me on DEX or Stable. I hope you have a few hours ahead of you.
I am always super excited. The last episode that we did, our pod, was so interesting. When I was looking at myself, I could see that I was getting too excited with the conversation and especially the money streaming one. I got so excited. I didn't realize it while we
You
were
stream
talking.
some to test? Because it's
Sorry?
quite crazy. Did you
No,
try
I
to
didn't.
stream some? Oh, no. Okay.
No, I didn't try it.
Next time.
But
Yeah, I want to show it in the arena as well. It's like a nice upgrade.
we sure we'll do that. But coming back, let's start with the birth of DeFi. So, if you could walk us through, according to you, how and when did DeFi got born?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is where I feel like the French community is a bit privileged because we had DeFi friends for like 5 years now. And our monthly meetup are actually wonderful pieces of archaeology at this point because it goes so fast. Um, there are like few components that really make the DeFi that we know, having some stables or some leverage solution on chain, the DEXs, of course, and I guess especially more over the last few years, everything that is related to restaking, the vault, and all the yield generation products. Um, the DeFi of back then was very much more bare bone, for sure. And it's kind of, there is no set date of like, oh, this is the start of DeFi. Um, some people kind of put it at the emergence of one of those primitives. So let's say, Uniswap or Maker. The problem is the early primitive of DeFi pretty much had a very slow start. So, if you look at Uniswap over the first year or first 2 year, it was getting some traction, but it was not like the billions of the volume daily we were used today. I don't want to say anything off in terms of data, but even to reach like 1 million of volume, it wasn't like, oh, the contract launched and the next day they were swapping 1 million volume. No, there was a whole process of people getting used to providing liquidity, getting used to using DEXs for the swaps and so on. So yeah, like you can put the start date as at the launch of one of these primitive, let's say Uniswap or Maker maybe, or and I guess I'm more of that school. You can put it more in terms of an event that gathered the space in a farming event essentially, because now we have these like every day and we have hundreds of these and we don't know which one to pick. But back then when you had one, that was a big thing. And I guess then here you would have two that comes to mind for their uh, being early and being novel. It would be the compound liquidity mining. So when they started, emitting comp token on Compound, and the synthetics, that was starting to, you had some incentives just to borrow from your SNX, but then you had incentivization on top with the USD you borrowed on Curve. So they were the first like yield product, I guess, in DeFi. So that could be those two. For the date, let me check actually. That's a cool thing with event. Is you can actually verify the date. I think we're in 2020, November 2020 for compound liquidity mining.
I agree. Like, I did that. I'm quite aware 2020 November or late 2020 is when Compound started the token craze. Like, farming tokens became the coolest thing that you could do online on chain in DeFi. But I'm going to take you a step back, right? So, what I would like to focus on is, in theory, in practical, like, the start of DEX could have been at a different point. But is it fair to think that it was Uniswap which actually brought DeFi and DEX into that one event, if you, as you said, right, was the starting or like ignition point for DeFi back in probably 2019.
Yeah, for sure. I guess my point, I was managing expectation in the sense that don't picture it as an ignition point, because
Yes.
again, Uniswap launched and not much happened, but it slowly but surely became normalized, and that it normalized and it became more used. It opened up more opportunities, possibilities for project, and then I guess the DeFi that we know came to be. Um, you have to keep in mind that this is really like a prerequisite for DeFi. I can
Oh,
show you actually. I found some archaeology.
sure.
Can I show you the big version of it?
Yeah, yeah, please
So
do.
I just wanted to show you essentially if you wanted to trade token. Uh, so back then you have no DEX. So
Mm,
essentially you're using centralized exchange, but then it's not DeFi. And then there is a bit of something in between, which is exchanges that you can connect directly with your wallet and trade from here. And then they have
mm,
different model. They might have trust or whatsoever. So this was one of these, Ether Delta. And, it's an order book exchange. The liquidity is not crazy. So essentially buying a token was a bit of an adventure before Uniswap. And that's really like how it changed the thing a lot. It made it trivial for project to attract, build liquidity, and so super easy for people to get exposures to those tokens as well. Before that, it was really more, I guess an adventure is a good thing because do you have the good token? Is there enough liquidity on which decks? But the other book on that, it was a whole project to go buy a token. You can't just like, oh, okay, I want to go. I don't know. I want to have some Avi. Okay, I'm gonna put that in my Dex aggregator, and poof, I have some Avi now. It was really like you had to plan for it a bit.
And those are the early years and early days of DeFi. And you are right. So there is no igniting point or start point that we can uh, pick saying that this is when it started, but it all started gradually. I have got a strong memory for Uniswap purely because that's when I started connecting or understanding a little bit about DeFi in 2019 towards the end. And the compound wave actually sucked me in because I was like, what is this happening? I need to understand. And I don't act first. Normally, my mind works where I need to understand before I want to act. And it took me a while to understand. And by the time I started understanding the game, sushi had
Yeah, I came.
already come in.
Yes. I guess that's maybe I can share this. Oop, no, not this one. I wanted to share another screen. Um, this one will show us the story pretty well, and I guess can I bring my points home? So this is the TVL, but I guess it's as good as a proxy. We can go on volume after. But my point was, you see how, so we have a launch in November 2018, and
Mm.
essentially it took around here. It took until early February 2019 to reach a million TVL on Uniswap. A million, I'm not being greedy here. A million, because back then, and even then, you see, it's like it did another couple of years. Let's say around 50 million before really. Uh, the first event we see on the chart is exactly as you were saying, the Sushi Swap launch and the response from Uniswap and so on. That really ignited the deposit quite a lot. Yeah, slow
So
grind.
Yeah, it's a slow grind. For this episode, let's focus on Bryce, Uniswap V1 and Uniswap V2, right? So tell us what was the most amazing thing that you can recall from Uniswap V1 and how did it change DeFi, if at all it did?
Yeah, I think the main contribution was really how easy it made the whole process. Both the swapping and most importantly, I think the providing of liquidity, which with those other books model and the other clunky stuff I just showed you with SR Delta was really like not something easy. You needed essentially professional market makers and most likely ties with centralized exchanges or some form of deal listing or whatsoever. So it really like essentially uh, achieved to make permissionless one of the key components of DeFi, which is, okay, anyone can ship a token, and there is like public infrastructure they can harness to build the liquidity for it. And if they build good liquidity, they will be pretty much automatically routed and discovered by other people. So it really, solve this whole part of the flow of like, where do people find, discover, and trade token, which was really, again, super complicated back then. It was non-trivial at all to just acquire a token. So yeah, it came out, and it was very slow at first, as I was saying, because there was also a mindset change that was required. People had been projects were used to pay centralized exchange and market maker and whatsoever for the token. It's just how things were, and so there was a lot of evangelization to be done on the project side to just kind of wake up to the game changing. Um, and it of course happened kind of like we were saying, slowly but surely.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, it's so I got a bit of a funny trivia, but I guess it will help people understand better what I was saying.
Sure.
So I was already working the space and for a project, Monolith, that is now token.com. And back then was Token Card. It's really brand. Anyway, and they had a token, and it was on the ERC20. And so I pushed really hard for them to supply liquidity on Uniswap because I was just seeing the spending for sexes and stuff like that, and it just didn't make sense. Um, and so this project had a decent amount of their own token in ETH and ended up being one of the top liquidity provider in Uniswap V1 and massively allocated with the Uniswap airdrop. But essentially, they were, I think they were LPing about $5 million worth of their token plus ETH. So just to give you an idea, you were like absolute top king of liquidity providers with 5 billion supply on the 2019-2020 period. But then you see, if you look at this period, 5 billion supply, depending on where you put the chart, could be like 5, 10%, 20% of the TVL. I don't know exactly when they deposited. But yeah, the scale was really something else as to what we have today. And yeah, that led them to have a very nice Uniswap airdrop. But that's another story. So yeah, to go back to your initial question, the big unlock for Uniswap is really like how it fluidified the flow of. Launching a token, they don't do anything for it specifically, but because they make it super easy to create liquidity, to swap tokens, they essentially, ease the barriers of entry to producing a token, being meme coins or legit tokens of project. And we saw a lot of excitement after that.
And that's so true, right? Because my experience with centralized exchange was pretty ordinary as well. And the stories that I've heard from founders, builders back in mid 2015, 16, even 13 and 14, right? It was like every centralized exchange would have different set of tokens at different set of price. So if you had to make a transaction, they had to verify, look up all the different places, what's the right price or what's the best price. And
The
that
tickers were not
continues.
even the same everywhere, no?
I-
XBT was for Bitcoin on like Kraken. I don't know. I didn't use Sexy so much, so maybe you know better than me. Sorry.
I've I had a privilege to do a podcast with one of India's biggest crypto founder for centralized exchange, CoinSwitch. So they were a bunch of young guys, and they were doing jobs and writing code, and they were not sure if you have discovered them, because they were pretty much catering as an aggregator, CoinSwitch.
Mm.
I'm not sure if they had the same name, but they started in 2016-17, and they were pretty much, you don't have to go to all the different centralized exchange to look up the price. They'll give you the price, and they started ordering. So and that story I've heard multiple times, from 2011 to 2013 cycle, or be it from 2015 to 2018 cycle. But the beauty, like, when Binance came in, back then, even in Australia, we've got two exchanges, which were pretty prominent. They came in around the same time, 17, 18. So that it became more and more easier. But as you rightly say, the fees were horrendous, right? You could not imagine the kind of fees they were charging. And then uh, when Uniswap started generating volume and fee, and it became so easy to provide liquidity or launch a project without any intermediaries or middlemen involved, I think that's the power that started the whole journey, in my opinion.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's more subtle, I guess, but the democratization of the liquidity providing. Because
Mm.
again, before that, it was a matter of essentially market maker or some kind of professional expertise. After that, it's really just approval on two token and, and signing a transaction. Um, and so yeah, and that was not just at the technical level, but I want to say at the behavioral, philosophical level almost. Questions like, okay, who should market make then? Because now everybody can be a market maker. Should it be the project taking a lot of its token and putting it in a pool like those token guards I was telling you about, or should it we do some incentive and maybe it's the token holders that supply, but they get paid for that. So we tried quite a few different things, but it wasn't even obvious that what we take today for granted, because yeah, it was brand new.
So again, from discussion and doing a pod last year with one of really fine developer. So he mentioned to me, X, Y equals K is something so simple and well known. Yet it simplified market making such a big time. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, actually. Oh, well, okay, it's good just to find. Sorry, because I'm in the drive, because I do have something pretty relevant to precisely this question I was trying to front run you. Just give me a second. Good
Yeah.
news is I do have some organization in that drive. Ta, 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 ta. Uh, okay. Up. So, um, yeah, that was a presentation I was doing just on that. You can see maybe as we were saying, this is again a bit all metrics. Let me make it a bit bigger. Um, but this one is pretty interesting. It shows you how the volume gently and surely, slowly moved to decentralized exchanges.
Mm,
Here, looking at Coinbase and Uniswap. So Coinbase is in the most green and Uniswap the most blue. The colors are not the best, sorry. Uh, but then, uh, this is the centralized exchanges between them. And essentially, back then, Binance was absolutely crushing Coinbase. And you can see on the previews that Uniswap was struggling to essentially reach parity with Coinbase and eventually reached it around Q2 2023.
mm,
But that meant it was still, pretty marginal compared to Binance. Now the numbers evolved more favorably.
mm,
Um, and yeah, so what I wanted to show is on essentially, I think this kind of explains uh, the liquidity structure a bit better.
mm.
Although it's, yeah, there is a chart. I'm sorry for that. But I guess the main thing to keep in mind is it's a liquidity structure that is really like an all-rounder made to essentially work in every situation without any assumption regarding the price of the tokens. And so it's very flexible, it's very permissive, it can stomach literally anything, two volatile token, two stable tokens, one volatile, one stable, other weird stuff. It can provide a price on any pair pretty much, and that's what made it so useful and popular, I think. And we like to talk about it in the past, but we can go back to the metrics later, like the today's metric, and see how even in terms of TVL, the V2 constant product X Y equal K is still a very common, potentially even dominant liquidity structure still to today. So yeah, it's not marginal at all.
And I find it very interesting. I'll just finish off by saying that, the V2 model, I personally feel works wonders in long term, right? So if you are chasing the short burst, maybe concentrated can play big part. But as you rightly explained in our conversation last time as well, that right, it's it's complementary. It's not opposing one another. Different, they serve different purposes, but they are both useful.
Yes, so to get a better perspective on that, I wanted to see, we see it better actually just going on the protocol. To show you the breakdown of Uniswap version, because of course we're kind of zooming just on Uniswap, so we're not looking at all the other pools. Where is my little uni? Okay. We're not looking at other dexes, but still, with the Uniswap version, it's pretty easy. Essentially, V2 and V1 are under the constant product model, and V3 and V4 are under concentrated liquidity. And as you can see, you still have a decent chunk of TVL on V2 particularly, about 1.8 billion for 2.8 for V3 and another 850 million for V4. But what is maybe even more telling is if you look at the fees, in terms of fees collected, they're pretty much at parity roughly. That means there is as much fees collected on just Uniswap V2 alone and on Uniswap. Actually, it's even better. Uniswap V2 is still collecting a bit more fees than Uniswap V3 and V4 together. So all the concentrated liquidity on Uniswap essentially. And I guess the fees are, I like to use the fees or the revenues as much as possible rather than the TVL. Especially when we get into the story of sushi and things like that, this will become mandatory because you do see some wild stuff happening over there. You see what I mean? Because of the incentives, there was some pool that has had a lot of value locked, but we're not necessarily processing a volume proportionate to that. So using the fee is a good proxy to kind of abstract away this problem, because now you really look at, fees stem from swap, so they stem from volume. So it's a proxy for volume essentially. We could have looked at the volume, but that volume is different again because on V3 and V4 you have a lot of correlated tokens, so like stable swaps or ETH and Rapstake ETH and things like that. So those guys, they will do a nice volume, but not necessarily a lot of fees because they're very low fees pair. So again, you have another problem. Essentially, good old fees is the best way to kind of get a pulse of the DEX and abstract, resolve all those situations that can arise that I was just highlighting and other cases. But yeah, long story to say, essentially V2 is not dead, far from it, and arguably even dominating still. More than 5 years later at this point. If you take even the launch of V1 because it was already in that liquidity structure, but if you take the launch of V2 as kind of your reference point.
I think that's a really nice segue to get into V2. But before we enter in, let's finish off with V1, right? So V1, which was version 1 of Uniswap, was really powerful and it got the attention. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly, steadily, uh, we started understanding the power of DEXs or what it can potentially become one day. And we have seen the numbers, right? So, what was, I know, but I probably want you to explain what was the reason why there was need for V2, which is version 2 for Uniswap?
Yeah, so version 2, I guess, is important to mark the difference compared to what we've been used to after V3 and V4 that are completely different infrastructure that are like a bit of work to migrate to because they have different logic and whatsoever. V1 and V2 was much more of a smooth transition because V2 was less of a significant change compared to how much V3 changed against V2 and so on. And I guess you see it in the TVL remaining on V1. So, it's very little, about 9 million, because most of it migrated to V2. There was actually a one-click migration tool to convert your LP position from one version to the other. And yeah, the changes were more like fixing the clunky stuff from the first release. It was a bit of a bootstrap project with grants and so on, and so it was things like giving more options in terms of the token pair. If I recall correctly, because even myself I barely use V1, you have to keep in mind. But if I recall correctly, on V1, every pair had to involve ETH, not even
Yes.
Rapis, just ETH.
Yes.
So every pair was assumed to be token against ETH, and that's it.
Yes.
And on V2, that was one of the big changes. Essentially, no pairs were arbitrary token against arbitrary token. And so that opened up some options to do stable pairs. It's not necessarily a good idea on this liquidity structure, but still back then it served us. And even weirder pair, like I don't know if you want to trade your token against wrap Bitcoin instead of trading it against ETH, or we saw various kind of things in that regard.
And
And yeah, also
sorry.
stuff. I'm not sure, but just to give you a vibe, there were things related to that, but I'm not sure exactly where the cutoff is. Where the position, the LP positions already tokenized in V1. I think they potentially already were, but then what comes with V2 is then maybe the sushi master chef for sure. Essentially, easier ways for project to incentivize the liquidity provider, because it was uncommon, if not even unheard of on V1.
Yeah, so I think they were structural, as you rightly said, paraphrasing or reconfirming the same thing. There were structural issues like incentivizing the polls was one, but more obvious one was the limitation that each token had to be paired with ETH, right? So that was a functional problem that anyone or everyone had to deal with, right? Whether they had ETH or not, they didn't have a choice. Whereas V2 give the option of providing liquidity with any pair, as you rightly said, arbitrary token to arbitrary token. So it could be anything with anything. So let's move on to V2 and the exciting time with Compound and Sushi around with farming. Because I like to introduce, even though this episode is focusing on Uniswap, but it is very important to capture. I think those two events are very important in Uniswap's journey to reach where they did.
Yes. And I love that you can see Uniswap is such a great protocol for that you can really see the history in the TVL chart. So we are gonna zoom in a bit in terms of time, so we can see the pattern a bit better. I'm gonna make the chart start right at the Uni V2 launch, so we can see the TVL going up, and I'm gonna zoom it out until shortly after the V3 launch, so we can get a nice, yes, perfect. So we get a nice window in the period of time we're going. Um, And essentially, I'm going to be boring again, but I wanted to do that so you can see my point that V2 launching by itself moved the needle, but didn't, supercharge the rocket, essentially. As you can see, you have a year almost. No, a bit less. It launched in May 2020, and you have like until August where not much is happening. The TVL, I mean, not much. Hey, TVL tripled or something like that, but TVL didn't explode. It's like a decent, slow.
4 months.
Yeah, it's decent, sustained growth. And then you can see the first proper spike on the chart is SushiSwap launching, and you can see that within a few days, literally, we're like, okay, 25 August, 300 million TVL. 2 September, 2 billion TVL. That's a proper move, the dragon is waking up. And essentially the reason for that was the launch strategy of SushiSwap, which for a period of 2 weeks, to get the people used to their protocol and to the new model, what they did is they were incentivizing a liquidity deposit on Uniswap, essentially. So there was those 4 core pools, stuff like ETH USDC, ETH USDT, things like that, where essentially you could provide liquidity on Uniswap, you will get your LP token, and then you will go on SushiSwap and stake it on SushiSwap for sushi, additional rewards. And the mechanism was so that essentially they did that for 2 weeks, and at the end of the 2 weeks, those positions were automatically converted to sushi LP positions if you didn't withdraw before that. And so there was a clever way to essentially have sushi launching at a non-zero TVL, because it had this bit of a transition period for 2 weeks where the liquidity was externalized, which can sound pretty bad for DEX, but then that also means, let me switch to the sushi chart. That also means you see how the sushi chart starts. It's literally like an instant billion that is coming from this migration.
That was the classic attack on Uniswap in probably smart way, as you rightly show. Within, I think, days, it went to $1 billion TVL.
Yes, and then from there on, the two kind of grow a bit hand in hand, essentially, after the launch. So if you can see on Uniswap, the pattern is, so first you have the 2 weeks of rising, and then the dump of the TVL, which is essentially when that liquidity migrated. But of course, as you can see, not long after the liquidity migrated. So migration is September 9, and a week after, roughly September 17, Uniswap is launching the liquidity mining program, and they're essentially doing pretty much the same as sushi, and it was almost the same pool. So it's just they were paying the incentive instead of sushi as a way to retain the TVL. Yeah, and it worked pretty well for the TVL as well. Allows them to keep growing, and at the same time, sushi was doing pretty well as well. Even you can see even bigger than Uniswap in terms of TVL. So December, for instance, you have sushi at 6 billion TVL. And or Uni is in December around here, like half of sushi or something like that, not even. So it was really like those liquidity mining wars between project, and I guess sushi really showed that the incentives work to move capital, and essentially allowed them to pop a very major DEX at the time, pretty much overnight. I'm sparing you a lot of drama that's happening on the sushi side as well, Chef Nomi and all of that, but trying to be conscious of time because there is a lot.
Just a quick anecdote. He resigned around that time. Is that right?
Yes. So is it? I think it's after migration. Because he was the one who handled all of that. But after that, he essentially sold his token, I think, and let go of the projects.
Something like that. Happened. In 2021, I think that was early 2021. Probably not early, if not early, mid 2021.
So yeah, and that was pretty much the start of it, I guess. From there on, users were used to provide liquidity. They were also very formatted to expect compensation in terms of token emission. There was even kind of became standardized in the lingo of DeFi. We have this pool one, pool two vocabulary that kind of comes from the farm of that era. So essentially, the pool one would be the pool where you're not taking a risk on the token itself of the farm. So typically, in that case, the pool one where Uniswap giving you Uni token to LP is USDC on Uniswap, or Sushi doing the same. You're not exposed to Sushi or Uni in either case. And the pool two would be where you take the pool one token and you LP it against ETH usually. So typically, the Sushi ETH pool on Sushi is the pool two. Even to that day, people are like pool one, pool two. It's a bit like in a few years, I imagine people will be like, young DeFi guys will be like, no, I'm not touching that pool two, man, it's insanity. And the dude will not even know where it's coming from. He'll just be like, no, that's a shitcoin pool. Essentially, that's not for me. You see what I mean?
And so I always connect this with there's a small presentation that I do around finance professional. So my way, I'll probably share that story with you some another time. But long story short, I use two parts. So one is a coordination game that we all know about, and property rights, right? So this was one of the product market fit example from 2020 end mid around September, August September 2020 to end of 2021. We clearly identified product market fit where coordination was clearly possible at a scale that we had never seen in mankind before, and the property rights, as in your ownership, was completely yours with your full custody. And if I was to look back, that was the aha moment in that context, because that actually set out the foundation of everything that has happened today and is likely to happen in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's a lot of still even mechanism and design that are still very common in this space today, are emerging then. And yeah, I guess we haven't touched it on it, but even more at the builder philosophy level, there was a big debate when this happened. This vampire attack from Sushi, as it was branded, it sparked discussion regarding the licensing in DeFi, which is before that, when I say it was kind of assumed that everything will be and should be and must be open source, and nobody was really thinking too hard about it. And if you don't like something, you fork it, and that was very cypherpunk vibes, and kind of everybody agreeing with that, I felt, at least. But this event forced project to be considered, because some people saw essentially this scenario as in a way, Uniswap being leached by SushiSwap, bleeding TVL and forcing them to launch a token, but also the actual design protocol, because SushiSwap is a very light, the first release of SushiSwap is a very light modification of Uniswap v2. It really doesn't do much in terms of changes apart from the sushi token and the MasterChef contract to stake your LP tokens and earn those sushi. But the core logic of the exchange is as such. And so it doesn't come out of nowhere that Uniswap v3 that we'll talk in other episode, even we cannot talk about it, but yeah, focus. But Uniswap v3 was under a business license that now has expired, but there was a license change essentially with that new version, and definitely this is a driving factor in that license change.
And I also see it, the license factor coming in when the ethos, the cyberpunk ethos, always preferred open source and open to all. Anyone can fork and anyone can build on top of it, right? But I've got a theory. I'm still testing it. That coordination is the game that we all play, but property rights determines the outcome, or it's actually the scoreboard of the game, right? So, how do you keep the scorecard for coordination game? And that is with property rights. And property rights can be in many different form and shape. In this case, right, the licensing with Uniswap V3 is in a way form of property right for me, the way I see it.
No, yes, for sure. What's still not very clearly defined is then, how that property rights extend to token holders. And this is where I'd like to see more exciting things. A project kind of a business license, why not, essentially? But if the DAO actually has control over it, that I would love, That I don't see at odds with my Cypherpunk core, if that makes sense, Because now you're telling me, okay, together as a DAO, we pool some resources, we worked on a design, we hired a developer, we did audit, we developed some code, and now we're gonna, together as a DAO, just like how we financed it and built it, we're gonna decide who we grant permission to use that to and under which terms. There are some that are working a bit like, I guess, in a model similar to that, but it's not very much DAO owned. But I'm thinking something like Avi, for instance, where it is forked. It can be friendly forked essentially by some project. Like there is one on Linea, I think, is the latest Avi instance.
I thought
I'm not.
Aave launched on Linea.
Yeah. But they launched under. They have a name. The Linea, some team tied to Linea is doing that. Is it Linea or is it another? They gave it a name, or maybe I'm mixing up. But there is an instance on an L2 that essentially is not under the Avi. Oh no, it's on Ink. Apologize. It's on Ink. And how did they call it? You see it on main Avi, but it has its own website and thing. And the name is slipping away from me. But anyway, so this is kind of a bit friendly forking, but essentially those licenses are discussed kind of behind private doors. I imagine with the entity that hold the actual IP, and that entity is not the Avi DAO. Therefore, not involved in the discussion, normally so. So that's why, long side way, but yeah, bit prediction, bit wish, bit where the space should be going. Space should be going towards business license if it wants to, but what I want to see is actual ownership of the property rights by a DAO. And when you say that, people will be like, yeah, but legal structure. I'm not even on the low level, like you can find a way to make it work with a council that multi-sig. The most important thing is that the DAO makes the decision. And now if I need to have some legal wrapper connected to a multi-sig after that does something on chain to actually grants the property right and collect the fees or whatsoever, I guess that's okay as an intermediary step. But the core thing that we're missing is, as you were saying, the ownership. We don't really have ownership of those IPs, even when you're token holder.
I agree. Like it's so. Actually, I was a little nervous when we decided to go ahead with this series, because I felt that it is so hard to capture everything, and there were actually so much happened in those 2-3 years that it's practically impossible to capture everything. And that's when I started feeling a little bit comfortable saying that, like, we are trying our best to provide highlight for people coming through or just discovering DeFi as to how we reached here. But it's not, there is no way we can capture everything in 40-45 minutes. But it's our small little tiny contribution to give them some snapshot from our point of view. So just recapping, V1 had limitation with incentivization, and everything was traded or paired with Ethereum. We moved on to V2, and it became pretty good because we could pretty much trade any token with any token, connect a pool. So decentralized exchange became much more dynamic and powerful. And then the magic happened with Vampire Attack, or so-called Vampire Attack, from Sushi, and back and forth launch of Uni token. So as we finish off this segment on V2, I've got a question for you. And the question is, looking back at what aspect of V2 and liquidity mining period still define DeFi today?
I think the V2 liquidity structure, the constant product, but also, and that's a direct consequence of the constant product, the fact that this pool will never tell you no. There is always liquidity. Given there is $1 in the pool, there is always liquidity available for your trade. The price you might get might be absolutely atrocious, and you might have 99% slippage, but you can still do the trade. You have to keep in mind, again, against order book, I go on an order book, and back then those were small order book on ETH Delta or whatsoever. I see that there is, I don't know, 5 ETH of liquidity available on a token at various prices. I buy those 5 ETH. I cannot buy 5.1 ETH. There is no more liquidity. I exhausted it. There is no liquidity exhaustion on Uniswap. Again, there could be slippage depending on the size of the trade relative to the size of the pool. It's not the magic solution, but in that sense, having a product that never says no to you is pretty DeFi in that essence. I feel, like, hey, my bank, I can go there after 5. If I do something they don't like, I have to provide them some more context. Like, Uniswap doesn't care, is open on weekend, on Christmas, never says no to a trade, and nobody can stop it. That's in that sense. And most of those properties are preserved on V3, of course, but the migration to concentrated liquidity makes it so that you have those liquidity blind spots, essentially, let's call them like that can happen again. So just like on order book, you might find yourself in a situation with concentrated liquidity where, well, the liquidity is exhausted, or very little is remaining at that price range. And essentially that means for the users, a situation when no trade is possible in that price area. So yeah, I think that's like really probably the main thing if I had to pick one, because it really defined what DeFi is to this day.
And just one last thing, you sum it up really well, but I also want your insight on liquidity mining, right? So, because it also started with V2, with Sushi and Uni. So, how did that impact the rest of the trajectory?
That's another item, essentially, that had a lot of influence on the future history of DEXs. So first, to go back to our point that we were making earlier on the fees and in comparing to TVL, so this is Sushi, where you can see the fees, and even at the peak, essentially you had peak around someday at 10 million, but those were really special. But essentially on that period of 2021, 2022, it was averaging around between $1 to $2 million of fees daily. And if you look at Uniswap in the same period, it was averaging something similar, but with a baseline of about twice, let's say, to be rough. So remember that the on the TVL the situation was quite the opposite. Sushi had bigger TVL then, so it kind of shows you that Sushi liquidity mining was successful in the sense of attracting TVL indeed, but the activity generated by that TVL was lower on Sushi than it was on Uniswap. And that's, I guess, one of the very first early finding of liquidity mining is like, okay, cool, you got some liquidity in your pool, but that's not the end of the story. Is this liquidity useful to something, or is it just sitting there? And so that was an important factor. Yeah, I guess when I was saying it influenced what comes next, I'm thinking Curve, Aerodrome, and the other balancer, the other emission model. that we will talk
Yes.
about in further episode. But just to connect on this point, where so with Sushi you have liquidity mining. Some pools are receiving sushi emissions every week. But you don't have a gauge system to allocate those emissions. Those emissions are essentially decided by the team, and they're doing some form of PD effort. Sometimes projects are doing joint incentives, putting some of their token next to the sushi token as reward for the pool, then they give a bit more. But it's a very uh, getting access to those rewards is essentially not permissionless and trust-based, and involve a human factor and having a good relationship with those guys. And maybe I don't know, you say something bad about sushi and they terminate your reward. I have no clue of something of that like that happening. I'm just saying, the mindset.
Then that's a
Yeah,
possibility.
yeah, and so yeah, I guess that's really stressed. Okay, this is good what they're doing, but probably we could do this decision of allocating better, because why should it be behind closed door, and why should it be the team doing it, and why should it be that maybe I put a lot of effort on building my liquidity on sushi, I bring some value with my token to the sushi exchange, and I don't know, a few months down the road they terminate the rewards on my pool, and there's pretty much nothing I can do against it. So yeah, it stressed the need for the gauges essentially that weren't there yet, but really were necessary, I guess, by the shortcomings of these early liquidity mining.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Bryce. I think we've tried our best to get in as much as we can in regards to both of DeFi, Uniswap V1, Uniswap V2. We will be doing part 2 of this, where we will talk about Uniswap V3 and the V4 version. So that's a wrap. Before we finish off, anything you want to add?
No, I think that was a good ride, pretty balanced in the early days of Uni. Yeah, excited for the next chapter. This is when the design space expands much more widely.
And just to remind, none of this is financial advice. We are just documenting the time that we had in DeFi and experiences we have accumulated in DeFi over the last 5-7 years. So once again, thank you for your time and support. Thank you for watching us, and do look out for episode 2 covering Uniswap V3 and V4.